Arm's Length, Episode 7. The room she had been put in was lovely. Everything smelled fresh and new, and there was even a vase of flowers that from all indications had come from the garden. Her grandmother had shown her to her room and left her to settle down, returning to the kitchen to put the finishing touches to the meal. The box fit under the bed, and she pushed it there with the intention of exploring its contents when she could. A knock at the door revealed the arrival of Elise, who smiled at her and sat on her bed. I invited myself to lunch. The nest is empty and Chris is away at work. I also wanted to be sure that you were okay after our discussion yesterday. A lot of emotions resurfaced, and I wanted to make sure you knew that you're the best news we've heard in years, and we're immensely happy to have you back. But you believe what you said, that something happened to my mother, and that she didn't just run away with some man. Oh yes, I'm very sure about that now. I spent all night trying to remember the events that occurred close to that period, going over everything that had happened in my head. There's no doubt about it. I want to look into things now that I'm here, get a fresh perspective. If you could help me, since you were there at the time, you can paint a picture for me. Who were her friends? Did she have any enemies? Are there any incidents that stood out? Of course, whatever you need. I was left with the feeling yesterday that we put emphasis on aspects of your mother that proved she didn't do what that note said. But you hardly remember her, and there was so much more to her. Sophie was funny. She always had a mischievous twinkle in her eye, and she loved playing practical jokes. And she was kind, a good listener. I miss her so much. It feels like a part of me is missing. I don't even know whether to speak of her in present or past tense. A part of me knows that if she were alive, nothing would keep her from us. My mom is a devout Catholic, as was my dad, and so was Sophie. But she wasn't one that would go to church and pray and then go and have an affair. The guilt would have killed her. If the note had said she had an incurable disease and felt the need to spare her family the pain, I might have believed it more. Anyway, you wanted to know peculiarities. We did part of our schooling in France and part here. During her youth service, after concluding her university degree, Sophie met your father and fell in love. It was a whirlwind romance, and they were married 9 months after meeting each other. You arrived a year after they got married, more or less. Your father was an independent contractor, working with construction projects. He was, I think, 3 years older than Sophie, and she said he was very hardworking and ambitious. I heard he has buildings all over Lagos now. Yes, he has a construction company and owns a good number of housing projects, Gabrielle said. Ellie smiled on hearing it. Sophie would be proud. She always said he would make it. I'm going to try to be objective and keep my suspicions to myself, knowing he's your father. But you know what they are. They had arguments like every other couple. Sophie said he was stubborn and strong-willed, but I never saw anything disrespectful or alarming between them. Was he a jealous man? If you believe he's responsible for her disappearance, you must have seen signs of excessive possessiveness, jealousy, rage. I can't say that he was. I never saw him lose his temper with her. But then your mother, from what I know, didn't tell him about her stalker or guys that showed interest in her. Her stalker? Why isn't he a suspect on your list? Yes. Sophie taught French in a school, and there was a man. I think his son was in her class, but I'm not sure about that detail. He would send her notes through his son. They made her feel very uncomfortable, and one day, Sophie called me. She was very nervous and said he must have followed her home because his car was parked outside her house, and he was watching her. What was his name? I can't remember. This was so long ago. I. Lunch! They heard the call and got up, silence falling between them. Elise was lost in thought, and Gabrielle was thinking that she finally had a tangible suspect. She needed to find out his name. The next day, she would go to the school and see if there was still anyone there from her mother's time. They probably would be about to retire, but it was worth a shot. Do you like it? Her grandmother interrupted her thoughts, observing her anxiously. It's delicious. She had made yam pottage, and it really was very good. It seemed like if culinary skills were hereditary, they were also selective and had skipped one generation. I am so happy to have you here. I brought out the old albums. I thought you would like to see them. Oh, Mama, it will probably bore her. Photographs and more photographs of people she doesn't know, Elise complained. I'd love to see them. I didn't have any photographs of my mother until a few days ago. Her offer to help wash the dishes was refused, and so she followed her grandmother to the living room. There, on the table, was a stack of albums and some envelopes filled with photographs, which they sat down to go through. The old woman explained who everybody was, a good number of them being relatives from France. It felt overwhelming to know that there was so much more to her family than her father. I always dressed the girls the same way growing up. Elise hated it, but Sophie didn't mind. As soon as they were old enough to buy their own clothes, they never dressed the same way again. The woman chuckled as they looked through pages of the albums in which the twins were quite young and wore the same dresses. They were so cute, Gabrielle said, looking at one in which the girls were smiling at the camera. They were, but they had very different personalities. My Sophie was so kind-hearted. I remember she once brought me an injured bird she found in the garden, expecting me to heal it. We kept it in a box for days, feeding and caring for it until it was well enough to fly again. Ah, look! The girls in their uniforms. And here. She looked through the photographs as the girls grew up and became teenagers. After a while, each appeared with different people when they got to university and formed other groups. Who's this girl? She's in quite a number of photographs. That's Loveth. She was your mother's best friend. She was even the chief bridesmaid at Sophie's wedding, she said, showing her a photograph of the wedding train. Really? Not Elise. Apparently, I already held the title of sister, and they'd promised themselves that role in each other's weddings. I must say I was mad at the time. But now it all seems so childish, Elise chuckled, leaving a tray with coffee on the table. I don't know how you take yours. There's milk and sugar on the tray, so please feel free and help yourself, she said, as she handed her mother a cup. Does she still live in town? Loveth? I think so, Elise replied. I've run into her a couple of times. She had married and had children. I haven't seen her lately, though, but I doubt she can tell you much. I think they had some sort of fallout just before it all happened. Really? Why? They were so close, her grandmother asked, surprised. Ellie shrugged her shoulders, and Gabrielle made another mental note. Later that night, after they had retired to their rooms, Gabrielle sat on the floor next to the box, looking down at the 5 letters, hoping there would be something of value in them. You've been busy. Alex, when can we do our part? Gabrielle read the message that Sandra had just written. Alex had not joined the conversation yet, but Gabrielle had filled her in on what she had found out. I tell you, this stalker guy is a suspect. The letters reeked of desperation, a creepy element to them. In one of them, he said that sometimes it felt like he was being pushed to do something crazy when he thought of her. He was obsessed. It was evident. He followed her around and made allusions to what she'd been wearing or some place he'd seen her at. He was watching from a distance. Gabrielle wrote, noticing Alex had joined the conversation and was typing. Evening, ladies. Give me a moment to catch up. Hi, Alex. But don't you think he would try to get the obstacle, your father, out of the way? Sandra asked. What if he kidnapped her? Maybe he got desperate and forced her to leave with him. At gunpoint or something. I need to find this Loveth woman. Why did they grow apart before she disappeared? Gabrielle replied. I'd ask your father about that. And also why he painted the living room just before you left Benin for good, Alex replied. I was young. I probably painted on the walls or something, and he didn't want to have problems with the landlord. It stuck out to me when I read your summary. Why paint just one room? The landlord said he visited the house after you guys left, not before. Your father didn't leave a forwarding address. I don't think he cared about getting into trouble with him because his 7-year-old daughter had defaced the walls of the house. Alex sent a voice recording of his reply, probably tired of typing. You have a point, Alex. One paints the whole house to avoid not being able to find the exact color later on. If those things are important to you, of course, Sandra agreed with the man. Okay, written that down too. I called in Piru earlier on and introduced myself. She seems to remember me quite well, as Donald and I poured on ourselves half a bottle of a very expensive perfume she had, and it made her really mad. I asked if she minded if you two went to see her, and she said not at all, and that I was free to send you her contact details. So Donald was your first boyfriend? I wonder what he's up to now, Sandra teased, including a few choice emojis in her reply. Working in a bank in Abuja, and seemingly doing very well. His mother asked if I was single, because he is. She was hinting at the fact that she thought we'd make a very good match. That's a proper mother. She recognized good wife material and she immediately thought of her son. Sandra was quick to reply, putting a smile on Gabrielle's face. I have to go to bed now. I am off to my mother's former school tomorrow, and I'm quite tired. They said their goodbyes as Gabrielle reread the letters one more time, trying to see if there was anything that would give her more information on her mother's stalker. Good morning, Father. How are you feeling? Gabrielle had waited until Peter had come for her before calling him, not wishing to cause any unrest in her grandmother's house, seeing as he was their chief suspect. Better. Deborah's driving me crazy, fussing over me like I'm some sort of invalid. Now she has me seated in the garden, staring into space for no good reason, as if I am a jaundiced baby that requires sunlight or a plant. Probably to get fresh air. Vitamin D, Gabrielle suggested. Like I said, for no good reason. Now my food has no taste. She's interpreted the order the doctor gave of reducing my salt intake as to not eat any salt at all, and ordered the cook to eliminate salt completely from my diet. I had a chat with the woman and offered her a little something, and she slips in some salt once my food has been tasted. Because Deborah goes to the kitchen to taste the food. Does she not understand the difference between reducing and eliminating? Because even a 10-year-old can tell you that. Father, you should not be doing that. Your blood pressure is dangerously high. Much as I don't like the woman, she's looking out for you. I will not spend the time I have left on earth living miserably. As soon as I'm strong enough, I will resume my activities and put order in this house and in the kitchen. Anyway, you said you moved in with your grandmother. Can't say there's a lot of love lost between us, but I'm sorry Jacques passed away. He was a very principled man. You know they had the audacity to have me investigated. I do, Father. You have to admit that the story is surreal, and that if it happened to someone else, you'd suspect the husband. Nobody believes she ran off with another man. They can believe what they want. She probably went with the man that I saw lurking about our home. You knew? Of course. Do you think I'm blind? She became quite jumpy those last days, and I saw her watching the car from the garden. I asked her, and she denied having anything to do with him. I asked the security guard too. We had a security guard? Why didn't you tell me that? Gabrielle asked her father. Why is he important? He had only been working for us for a few months, and the day I came home and found that note, he hadn't even been there to give an adequate explanation. Quite an inept youth, if you ask me. Your mother sent him the market to get her some things. She did that sometimes. When he got back, she wasn't in the house, so he left the bag on the porch. It was fruit or something similar. I found it when I got home. Yes, these details are important. Father, you need to try to remember and fill me in. I keep getting surprises whenever I speak to people. How did he get the job? What happened to him afterwards? What was his name? Gabrielle bombarded her father with questions, feeling slightly irritated by the things people considered were important or not. Look, I am humoring you because I know that I let things get too far, and you had a right to know something as important as that. But I do not wish to talk about this constantly. If I was able to pick up the pieces of my life and make something of myself, it was because I closed that chapter completely. Your mother chose to go, remember? And I stayed. I understand. Just answer the questions on the security guard, please. She heard him sigh and wondered if he would hang up or reply. One never knew with her father. We hadn't ever had one, but there had been an increase in robberies with forced entry in a few homes in the area. I had to travel sometimes to visit construction sites, and I mentioned it in the office when Efosa, my associate, told me about this young man he knew. He came for an interview a few days later. He was about 20. He'd failed the entrance exam to university a few times and was looking to make some money. I can't remember his name, only that he had the annoying habit of whistling songs. There was a nursery rhyme in particular that was a very important part of his repertoire. I had to tell him to change the tune a few times. One more thing, Father. Why did you paint the living room before leaving? What? I did no such thing. The landlord said it reeked of paint when he visited a few days later, and that he was surprised only one room had been painted. Do you think I had time to think about that? Oh, I know. I just said one more thing, but I just remembered something else. And I'd really appreciate you thinking back and giving me an answer longer than 3 words. Mrs. Oko said a young man had been living in the semi-detached bungalow next to ours. Did you think he could have been the one she left with? What kind of person was he? A good-for-nothing man. 5 words for you, but I'll elaborate a bit more to save you asking more questions. Luckily, he got transferred, but every weekend a new girl was around. You can imagine our shock when we found out that he was engaged, and to a lovely girl that came over to introduce herself to us and evidently had no idea what she was getting into. He was also a stingy person. When I told him that we should get some form of security due to the crime rate in the area escalating, he said he wasn't going to pay for that. So I did. He still expected our security man to open the gates for him and for his girlfriends. I found out that he'd given him money to not allow more than one girl into the house at the same time. I saw them talking one day, and the young lad confessed after a thorough interrogation. I soon put a stop to it and told him that he was to open the gates both for himself and for his guests. If he wanted to enjoy the privilege of having a security guard, then he was to pay for it. But no, aside from the fact that he was no longer living there at the time she packed her things and left, I heard your mother put him in his place once when he tried to get fresh with her. My car was inside the garage, so she didn't know I was home. Forget about him. You'll have to look for your answers elsewhere. I'll leave you to rest now, Father. Don't bribe any more of the domestic workers and take care of yourself. I'll call you tomorrow and won't ask you any questions then. Though I can't promise more won't come up in a few days, she said, laughing. Peter had parked outside his school. The building was quite old. The wall surrounding it had taken on the characteristic color associated with dampness and had a general dilapidated look. There was a big sign that read, Flying Colors Secondary School. A uniformed man at the security gate pointed her in the direction of the administrative building, made up of 2 floors, which could have done with a coat of paint or 2. Gabrielle knocked on the door that read Principal and took a seat following the indication of the secretary. She had called ahead to make an appointment, not wanting to risk being told off. For some reason, being there reminded her of waiting in a similar office to be told by Mother Superior that she could spend midterm or holiday in school as she was not going home. It brought back that familiar sadness of not being wanted by anyone but the nuns. Mrs. Amadason will see you now. The secretary got up and escorted her to the door, knocking on it and opening it for her. Behind a desk was seated a woman she calculated to be in her early 60s, of strong constitution, with permed grey hair, and of course, the glasses from behind which it was customary for any respectable principal to peer disapprovingly at everyone. Gabrielle stood waiting for an invitation to sit, and the woman pointed to the chair across from her. Good morning, madame. Gabrielle Ibrahim, are you in any way connected to the GI brand? I am. The woman studied her gravely for a moment, reminding the young woman once again of women holding similar posts who had appeared stern but had treated her very kindly and done their best to substitute affections that she had lacked, almost succeeding in making her feel normal. The daughter of Sophie Ibrahim, who happens to be our most international designer, is here. I had my secretary look into you yesterday when she told me that you'd requested a meeting. To what do we owe the honor of your visit? Within a split second, Gabrielle decided to tell her the truth, sensing that it would be the only way to get the cooperation of someone accustomed to dealing with problems from students and their parents on a daily basis. I don't know if you remember my mother. I do. I was a teacher here at the same time as she was. She taught French and I mathematics. I remember I came to school one day and her colleague Ndiaye was stressed out as she hadn't come to work and he had to deal with her classes as well as his. We tried to reach her, but nobody was picking up the phone at the contact number the school had. If I'm not mistaken, your father's office was also called and the secretary refused to give any information or pass the call through to him. We never saw her again. Neither did we. What? For the first time since the interview started, she could read genuine shock in the countenance of the other woman. She imagined that she was used to listening to all sorts of things, and very little threw her off balance. But this had. I came home from school and she wasn't there, and I never saw her again. That's why I'm here. I thought I'd find out if there was anyone she was close to that still works here. Who can tell me if they noticed any strange behavior in those last days, or if anything out of the ordinary happened? Didn't she leave a note or something? How can someone just disappear like that? She did leave this. Gabrielle handed the note to her, and the woman read it, a frown on her face. She stared into space when she concluded. This is all very strange. I didn't know her very well. We did share the same staff room and would chat from time to time, or sometimes join in the lively debates we teachers had. But it seems very out of character. I never saw any signs that she could be having an affair. If she was having marital problems, she didn't confide in me, but she looked happy. She was a cheerful person. Monsieur Ndiaye will be able to tell you more, as they were quite close, often speaking in French. He's from Senegal and will retire very soon. He's one of the few teachers that has remained in this school almost since its opening. I still can't believe what I just read. I mean, there were a few female teachers that were single, and they would show off gifts that they'd received from admirers. But did you notice anything out of the ordinary that could help us understand her sudden departure? The older woman shook her head and then frowned as if suddenly remembering something. Sometimes her sister or your father would come and pick her up after school. One day, her sister did, and they had a terrible argument. I was far away and couldn't hear what it was about, but she was gesticulating a lot and seemed really upset. It must have been serious as your mother walked away, refusing to get into the car. I am sure it was just an argument between siblings. I have three sisters and I know how things can rapidly escalate and get out of hand. I know she suffered from terrible migraines and once in a while would be unable to come to work. I think she took 2 or 3 sick leaves when she had suffered miscarriages. We all signed the Get Well Soon cards, and Ndiaye and another teacher she was friends with went to see her on at least 2 occasions that I can remember. I'm sorry that I can't tell you anything more. She was a lovely person. Maybe that was what shocked me most when we didn't hear from her again. I did see her parents come and talk to Monsieur Ndiaye afterwards, but he didn't mention what it was about. They also spoke to the then principal. I think another man came with them, but we weren't informed of the reason for the visit. Thank you. You've been very helpful. I can't remember ever being here. How have things been? Well, seeing that you've been honest with me, I can only extend the same courtesy. Not good, I'm afraid. As you can see, the school is looking very run down. We need to update our systems, get new materials. The list is endless, but I have to ensure the salary of my teachers. That is my priority to keep things going. I'm really sorry to hear that. I won't take any more of your time. You've been very kind to receive me. I wonder if I could speak to Monsieur Ndiaye. Of course. I'll look at his schedule and tell you if he's free. She looked at her computer to get the information required. He'll be free in half an hour. I'll ask my secretary to inform him that you wish to see him and he can meet you here. Thank you. I'd like to look around if it's all right with you. Of course. I thought I'd ask. How long will you be staying in Benin City? It would be great if you could give the students a talk. You're a great inspiration. Some of them need to know that they must work hard to make something of themselves. Don't say no. Just think about it. I know you must get similar requests and that you're very busy, but it would mean a lot. Gabrielle nodded, indicating that she would give it some thought. A number of letters had arrived at the brand headquarters from schools inviting her to speak to their students, but she had not been able to do so yet. The director of the firm had given tours of the workshop and factory, but as she held onto the rusty railings going down the stairs, it just felt like the right thing to do, so many years later in the school where her mother had taught. She walked along the corridors, observing uniformed students through the windows, noticing some of the panes were missing and the blackboards looked really old and difficult to read. The chemistry lab was empty, and she ventured in. She had enjoyed the practical aspect of the subject, and she stood a moment observing the almost empty cabinets. Can I help you? A young man in a white coat asked her politely. I am waiting for someone, and Mrs. Amada soon kindly let me look around the school. This was the only empty lab. How do you work with this? There must be so many students. She pointed at the cabinet. There are. We've repeatedly asked for funds to buy more materials. For now, reactions are conducted by the two chemistry teachers, and the students look on. She thanked him and walked back towards the administrative block, not wanting to keep Monsieur Ndiaye waiting. The secretary smiled at her when she came back and sat down. Opening her bag, she brought out a booklet and wrote something in it. Do you have an envelope you can give me? Yes, of course, was the reply, and she handed one to her after rummaging in a drawer. Please give this to Mrs. Amada soon after I'm gone. And this is my card so that she can contact me for the talk she asked me to give. Thank you, madame. I sent someone to notify Monsieur Ndiaye to meet you here. Gabrielle sat down once again and waited for the man who she had been told had been a good friend of her mother's. Osareme, I was told there's someone waiting to see me. A man in his early 60s walked in, lean and of average height. Gabrielle stood up when he walked in, and he looked at her inquiringly. She held out her hand. Monsieur Ndiaye, I'm Gabrielle Ibrahim. She watched recognition slowly sink in, and his eyes widened in wonder. Gabby! Sophie's Gabby? Yes, sir. His eyes became moist and he blinked back the tears. I can't believe it. I never thought I would see you again. You were so small the last time I did. You've grown into a beautiful woman. I could have passed you on the street and not recognized you. Is there a canteen we can go to? I'd love to go somewhere so we can sit and chat comfortably. We have a very small one. Follow me. I can't believe that you're here. Where's Sophie? He stopped walking and looked at her, and Gabrielle shook her head in answer, and she explained the situation to him. He sighed, and they walked in silence. Once in the canteen, they ordered snacks and something to drink. Gabrielle was not hungry, but it was hot, and the cool drink was welcome. I was told my mother and you were quite close when she worked here, so I thought you might be able to tell me something about her last days here. You really haven't heard from her? In all these years? No, I was led to believe she was dead, and only recently was this note shown to me. She handed it to the man, who read it and shook his head vigorously. No, Sophie did not write this. I can tell you that there was no way she would have willingly left you or your father. An affair? Sophie? I saw her refuse gifts, even money from men. No, there's just no truth in this note. And yet she was never seen again. I know that it's been a long time, but please, tell me about her last days here. Anything will be of great help. Was something worrying her? Did you notice her especially nervous? I have given this so much thought over the years, as I've never heard from her again. Not even a letter or phone call to tell me why she disappeared like that. She was her normal self. Sophie suffered from migraines. The last day I saw her, she'd come to school and had a terrible one. Her medicine wasn't working, and she was throwing up. So I told her to go home, and that I'd share my time between my classes and hers, and try to keep the children busy. Was this something that happened often? Not often, It happened a few times, and she'd also covered for me when I fell ill from malaria, for example, or once when I had to go to my country to see my mother who'd fallen ill. We did that for each other. Your mother was a very good friend to me. I didn't have family here, and I remember how she would bake or buy me things I needed. She knew I was very forgetful. Anyway, I went to the principal's office and placed a call to your father's company. A lady picked up and said she would send somebody to pick her up and take her home. That was the last time I saw her, sitting in the staff room with her head resting in her arms. As I didn't hear from her, I assumed she would come to work the next day. But she didn't, and we weren't able to reach her. A few days later, your grandparents came with the police to ask what her last movements had been. They didn't show me that note or give an explanation. I asked if something was wrong, but got no reply. Your grandmother looked sick with worry and transferred it to me. I knew something was wrong, but had no idea what. Did you know of anyone that would wish her any harm? I was told she had some sort of stalker. Yes, the man had a son here, and he saw your mother one day and got obsessed with her. He sent her gifts, tried to talk to her on every occasion he could. His son brought her notes, and towards the end, he had taken to following her. It made Sophie very uncomfortable. She didn't want to tell your father to avoid a fight between the men, but I know they had an argument because he'd seen her look at the parked car outside their home. I tried to warn him off myself, but you spoke to him? What did he say? I don't know how I summoned the courage. I'm not a big man, as you can see, and he was quite burly. I saw him one day in his car after school. His son wasn't there yet, so I walked up to him and said he had to stop pestering her, that she was married and not at all interested. He came out of his car, and I still remember thinking that if a fight ensued, it would not end well for me. He asked what I intended to do about it, and if I knew who he was. I was used to dealing with bullies of all ages, and so I looked at him and replied that I really didn't care who he was, but that he was not to come near your mother, as I had alerted our security team and he would be disgraced. I had done no such thing, and our security team was made up of two men that took shifts and were hardly ever where they should have been. Still, he looked at me in a threatening way and got back into his car. What was his name? Was he married? I don't know his first name, but his family was, and is, very well known. He owns the ADC Boutique Hotel. He wasn't married, but had some sort of understanding with the mother of his child. She came looking for Sophie one day to make it clear to her that she was not a doormat and would deal with her if she tried to take what was rightfully hers. Sophie and I were walking to the bus park when she stopped her car, asked what her name was, and came out, spoiling for a fight. Wow, that must have been tense, Gabrielle exclaimed. It was. I had no idea what would happen next, and Sophie was not a big woman, so I prayed things would not get out of hand. But Sophie looked at her coolly and told her that she had no interest in any other man that was not her own husband, and that she would do her a favor if she was able to keep the man. I can't remember his name, away from her, because if he kept harassing her, she would go to the police. It threw the other woman off balance. She hadn't expected that reply, but she quickly recovered and at the top of her voice warned and insulted her before leaving. As soon as she did, we looked at each other and your mother admitted that she was shaking. I don't know if any of them did anything to her. Now that I think about it, I can't remember seeing him again after Sophie disappeared. Picking up their son, I mean. My father told me that he recommended a young man to help us at home for a short period. Yes, my cousin, Sabine. Your mother had been ordered to rest after a miscarriage, I know. Sophie was against having strangers in her house. Your dad picked you up from school or had someone do it and she took care of the rest. But the last time hit her really hard and your father insisted. So I told her that my cousin was looking to make some extra money. She'd arrived from Senegal and was staying with me. Not surprisingly, she lasted a little over a week. Does she still live in Benin City? I would love to see her and speak to her. She lives in Lagos, but I'll give you her number so you can speak to her, the man offered. Thank you so much. I don't want to keep you. You've been very helpful. I'm very sorry that you're going through this. It's terrible not knowing what has become of a loved one. I believe her parents, like me, did not give much credibility to this note. It's been a long time, but one can only hope that the truth comes out, at least in order for you all to get some peace. Gabrielle nodded. They all needed to know what had happened. One more thing. Mrs. Amadison told me about a row a few days before my mother was last seen. It was with her sister, Elise. She couldn't hear what it was about, but apparently it seemed quite serious. Do you know anything about that? I know that Sophie had refused to go home with her, so we walked together to get a bus. She was visibly upset, but didn't say anything about it, and I didn't want to pry. Sophie didn't speak about family things, not negative ones. I, on the other hand, complained and complained to her, especially about my younger brother in Senegal, refusing to study and treating me as if I was the central bank. Oh, she had a very close friend, Loveth. Have you spoken to her? They used to tell each other a lot of things. Ah, Elise. You know, I showed some interest in her, and I wanted your mother to put in a good word for me. She looked at me and told me to fix my attention on another woman, and that she was telling me for my own good. A few years later, I met my wife. I wish Sophie had been able to get to know her. I haven't spoken to Loveth yet. I'm trying to find out where she lives. I have her new number. I met her at a wedding about 3 years ago and walked up to her. She had a particular laugh that was difficult to forget. None of us had heard from Sophie, so we exchanged numbers. It was all we talked about, I remember. We found it so strange that no one had heard from her. She said she'd bumped into Elise a few times, but she hadn't given her any information. But then, Elise didn't like Loveth. Why not? My guess is jealousy. They just simply did not get along. Here, let me have your number so I can send you the two contacts. Gabrielle gave it to him and then slowly walked to her car. Her mind was racing. She now knew of a few people who could have harmed her mother, but were those grudges strong enough to get her out of the way? It somehow did not feel like any was reason enough. Her phone rang. It was Paul. He called her every day, but she did not tell him about her progress, feeling that he did not approve of her investigations. She just could not go back to life in Lagos without at least trying to unravel the puzzle. So, now we have two clear suspects, the owner of the hotel and his girlfriend. They both would benefit for different reasons from her disappearance. I don't have his name, but I know the hotel, so I'll go and see him. My aunt hasn't mentioned any disagreements with my mother, but it could be nothing. They were so long ago that she probably regrets them and doesn't consider them to have any bearing on whatever happened. I'm interested in seeing if she doesn't have the birthmark, though, just to eliminate the probability that I met the wrong twin, like in the movies. But that's a remote possibility. Her parents would have known which daughter disappeared. I hope you guys are having a good day. There was no reply to her WhatsApp, as they probably were not connected. So Gabrielle busied herself, replying to work emails. Josephine Balogun, the director of GI, was very good at her job and could handle the day-to-day running of the company. She normally did, which left Gabrielle time to work on the designs and production, which was what she really enjoyed doing. But there were things only she could take care of, especially when it had to do with the London office. It was the first office she had established before moving back to Nigeria, as it took care of all the overseas sales points and orders. A sound from her mobile indicated a message had just come in from Sandra. Hi, Gabrielle. Tomorrow, Alex and I are going to see Nkiru. I called her and she accepted. Have you spoken to the teacher's cousin? Sabine? No. I'll call her this evening and ask if she minds you paying her a visit. How's the case going? As well as can be expected. Both sides have presented all the information, evidence, witnesses. We're waiting on a deliberation, and then I can come and join you in Benin. Hopefully this weekend, her friend replied. I'll be in Benin in 2 days. Please wait for me before going to see the stalker. Hello, ladies, Alex typed. Oh, it's fine. I have Peter with me for protection. Besides, he must be in his 60s, so he's probably not as menacing as he was 27 years ago. Just wait for Alex. This Peter guy I have not seen, and for all I know, he could run off at the first sign of trouble. Alex at least has a presence. I have a what? Alex asked. You are fit, so you can look intimidating. You have a commanding presence, Sandra explained. I'm struggling to find the compliment there, but Gabrielle, wait until I get there, Alex wrote in reply. Fine, I will. Although if I disappear after that visit, we will all know who the culprit is. The phone rang and she picked it up. The voice on the other end was contained, but one could still feel the excitement coming through. This is Mrs. Amadasun. I honestly don't know what to say. I'm still looking in shock at the check my secretary handed over to me. This is so much. Thank you. Thank you. My mother was happy there, and I saw when we talked that you really care for your students. You deserve the chance to make a difference. I'm happy to help. I like getting directly involved with projects that I see are well organized and can make a difference to our society. You have no idea how much we've fought to remain open. This is just... There was silence as the other woman gathered herself. Please, come and see us again. I'd like you to see what your money is used for. And if you have the time before you leave Benin, the students could really benefit from a talk from you. I'll let you know. Thank you so much for your help this morning. If you remember anything else about my mother, I'll contact you. I hope you find what you're looking for, Mrs. Amadasun said. Gabrielle hoped so too. Even if she didn't like what she found out, she needed to know. To stay up to date with my latest episodes, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications.